any of the stuff I've said so far. Otherwise, I will just keep on rambling forever. Yeah.
How do you do automatic tests for websites?
How do you do automatic tests for websites? So yeah, on the front end, it seems kind of tricky, right? So there's actually software called web drivers that will actually like browse the site for you. And you basically tell it, click this button, type this into this field, and make sure this is on the page after you do it. And go ahead and take a screenshot of that and stuff like that. And then some of it you can do without having to actually run it in a browser. You can actually write unit tests on each little chunk, like each individual component, and make sure that if you pass in certain props, it's going to render certain HTML, right? So it's a combination of those things. You can write unit tests that don't necessarily require an entire web rendering engine. But then you have a lot of tests that they build out the DOM and everything, and you just make sure all the nodes are where you expect them to be. Yeah, it's pretty cool. And of course, we don't have time to like teach you how to do it in here, unfortunately. That's one of the most unfortunate things about the short classes is you can't teach testing, and we feel pretty strongly about testing. Really good question. Any other questions? Yeah, Matt. What does Fretless do? Yeah. So web and mobile apps and teaching, basically. So we do full stack web. We do back end. We do front end. And on the mobile side, we mostly do mobile apps. I mean, so far, that are written in JavaScript using Cordova or Ionic and stuff like that, or React Native, which is a thing that exists, which I'll mention tomorrow again. You can write native mobile apps in React. Although we do know how to actually write them native if we have to, we just don't very often because since we don't do it very often, we don't have a ton of experience at it. But it is not at all uncommon for us to like meet with a client and tell them, hey, we haven't actually worked with this particular technology before, but we learn new technologies all the time, and we're sure we can do it. And we get the gig, and it goes fine. But that's actually not too uncommon. Like that Angular 2 gig that we just did. Yeah, Solomon. No, there's 4 of us that are programmers. Yeah, right. Dave Jones, Miles, you and me, and then we have a salesperson now. Eventually, we weren't able to do all of the sales ourselves. So yeah, there's 5 of us total, 4 programmers, and we've hiring developers is hard. We've had pretty good luck doing it so far. Despite ending up with a-holes like Seth, right? But otherwise, it's worked out pretty well. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It's too personal, but like I read your interview on the website. Did you write a code when you were at Apple?
No. No. Yeah. So me getting into programming is a fairly recent thing. I'd say it's been about 2 years total. I've been studying that.
This is where in like the commercial you would see the little print at the bottom, results not typical. Do not expect to be Seth after 2 years of programming.
I have a tendency, like I said, to do something like all I do for a long time. So, yeah. Put a lot of work into learning it and practicing.
And all of the work experience he did have really prepared him very well. We're going to talk about that a little more tomorrow, including like the specifics of Seth's journey, if I may call it that. Yeah, sometimes you're just creating in the development job, but a lot of times you're troubleshooting. You spend most of your time troubleshooting your own work. So, to go back to the question of what does Fretless actually do, like as far as what we actually do every day and the kinds of jobs we actually take on. Sometimes clients actually come to us with an idea for an app, maybe even a design, and just tell us they want us to build it from scratch. More often, they already have a development team and they have some deadlines coming up that they're not going to meet, and they just need some extra help for a short period of time. So they bring us up to kind of increase their velocity. And then sometimes they have a lot of inexperienced developers, and either they don't have a lot of experienced developers, or all their experienced developers are too busy knocking out features to be able to answer the juniors' questions. And so they bring us on to, help increase velocity, but also to mentor the new developers, kind of show them the ropes, pair with them, all that kind of stuff, and provide some leadership. Maybe even sometimes like become a temporary manager there. Like Miles actually had a consulting job where this wasn't what he went there for. He went there to just help them get more done faster. And he ended up being the interim director of engineering at the company because they couldn't find anybody to do it. And he had basically taken on all that responsibility. So they just gave him the temporary title and begged him to quit Fretless and go work there, which he didn't do. And now they think he's a freak because they just don't understand why. Why wouldn't you take it? You don't mind working here. Why won't you just work here? Like, man, I just love Fretless too much. It's just too great. So yeah, those are the kinds of jobs we typically do. And then training, like besides doing boot camps like this, sometimes we do corporate training as well, which is not that dissimilar sometimes, except probably they're already people who've been professional developers for a few years. Other questions about basically any of that? So back just for a moment to when Miles first started at our previous job. So this was like 2007. And we started doing Ruby. We found out there was a Ruby meetup in Indianapolis, or Miles found that out and told me about it. And I have a little bit of social anxiety, which you might not guess because I get up here and talk for 6 hours a day. But this is almost more like performance. And as you know from Sam's birthday yesterday, I'm not terribly shy about performing. But like to go to a meetup where I know nobody is like terribly intimidating to me, especially 10 years ago. Miles is super outgoing, so that worked out really, really well. So I was excited to go to that with him. And we went, and I was like, finally, I am among my people. These Daves are my kind of Daves. So let me tell you about this first Ruby meetup that we went to. There was Dave Woodward. There was Dave Christiansen. There was Dave Baldwin. There was Dave Jones. That's how we met him. There was me. There was Miles, and there were like 3 other people. So I don't know what it is, but like the Ruby community in Indianapolis at that time was like nothing but Daves. It was insane. It was just great. It was such a good community. For all these years, I hadn't really been working with other programmers. Remember, I had just working with a bunch of like systems analysts and engineers, not analysts. Those are programmers, like networking engineers and people like that. And like what little exposure I had to professional developers didn't necessarily give me the best impression of them being the nicest and easiest people to get along with. So that was just, unfortunate in who I'd been exposed to. But meeting these people who are all like really eager to keep learning, humble and eager to help others. I mean, it was just amazing. It's an amazing community, and it still is. And a very short time after we started going, the guy who was organizing it, who was one of the other Daves, didn't want to organize it anymore, so Miles took it over, and now he's been doing it for 10 years. So he's the organizer of the Indianapolis Ruby Brigade, or IndyRB. And a few years ago, he also started something called Indie Hackers. I wore the T-shirt yesterday. IndieHackers.org, which is kind of the meetup of meetups for programmers in Indianapolis. So, the Python folks and the Java folks and the .NET folks and the Ruby folks and the JavaScript folks, Angular and React in the same room, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. we all get together and do stuff for the community, or get together and just have a social event where we, just all get exposure to each other and share ideas and all that stuff. And it's really just a great community. I can't say enough about it, because that's what really made me grow, was hanging around other developers who knew more than I did. In general, you don't want to be the smartest person in the room, because then you're not going to learn anything. It's great to share what you know, but you should also hang out with people who have something to teach you, which, by the way, is almost everyone. So if you think you have nothing to learn from someone, you're an arrogant jerk, and get over yourself. But by the way, if you are an arrogant jerk, thank you for keeping it quiet these last 3 weeks, and taking my warning about know-it-alls to heart the first day. I am still amazed that there were no problems with that, because there have been some problems with that in the past. It can be very disruptive. But yeah, getting involved in the community, going to meetups, and if you want to do that kind of stuff, well, indiehackers.org does actually have a calendar of events and also a newsletter. The Indie Hacker newsletter is pretty good. It talks about the meetups. It talks about what projects people locally are working on, and it has a job board, stuff like that. And you should all be going there now and signing up for the newsletter. Also, there's JavaScript Weekly, which is not an Indianapolis thing, but newsletters like that are really, really helpful. So JavaScript Weekly, even if you don't read it cover to cover, there are no covers, of course, but it's just really handy to just skim the headlines to get an idea of what's going on. When a new version of like React Router comes out, that's how I hear about it. On Friday, NPM 5 was released, which addresses a lot of the reasons that Yarn had to be created. Yeah, a new version of Node today. So, this stuff moves constantly, and there are a lot of blog posts in there and things like that. It's worth subscribing to stuff like that to stay on top of things, because as you can imagine, staying on top of all the changes is, well, really it's impossible, but you have a fighting chance if you keep up that way. And now, most of my best friends are people that I met through the programming community in Indianapolis. So now I live in Bloomington, where I have no friends, which is kind of a bummer. But anyway, yeah. Questions about that or anything else? I think I'm done with that part of my spiel. You got more questions, I know you do. I can take it. Bring it on. Want to ask Seth how much he can bench? Yeah.
I actually forget the name of the company, but they're trying to hire 2,000 employers within like 4 years or so, maybe. Can you talk a little bit more about it?
I've read some of those things, but I forget who all it is. Salesforce is supposed to be hiring 500 apprentices or something.
Yes. So Salesforce is doing, I think, 200 apprentices just this year.
Gosh, dang.
Yeah, and a couple thousand over the next 3 years. Infosys, I think, is the one.
Yeah, Infosys, that's it.